of a connection with it. But the bad news by early 69 is Richard Nixon was only president days when you had the Santa Barbara oil spill. And the well casting blue and all of that beautiful pristine beach. Your president used to be at Santa Cruz and knows how beautiful that California coast is. And just seeing birds and gook and just marine animals dying. And it's on Nixon's watch. And Nixon goes out there wearing his suit, walking around this oil site. But he was moved. Remember, California was a Republican state. And Nixon was from there, first Republican president. And all the rich Republicans had homes on the ocean, and they didn't want it polluted. So it was you might call it not in my backyard issue, a NIMBY issue, but still, Nixon had to listen to some of them. And then the other thing that happened in 69, which I alluded to, was the Cuyahoga River catching fire in Ohio. What you may not know is when Ohio River caught fire by Cleveland, that was the 13th time it caught fire. The photo Time magazine put on the cover about the spill was disingenuous. The photo was taken in 1952, they ran, and pretended like it happened in the summer of 69. And they wrote this killer essay, that's back when Time magazine had a lot of clout, about every dead river in America. And the 1-2 punch of Santa Barbara and Cuyahoga had the country just leaning forward. And that's what led to Gaylord Nelson moving forward to create a First Earth Day. And it's what led to Frank Church to give a comment like I just read, where every time Church would talk, it would be like, if you love America, you have to take care of its lakes, rivers, wilderness. That's the essential birthright. The one thing Church was pushing for was something that I would call a wilderness Bill of Rights. Church was trying to say that you and you and you and you, everybody here, we have a right as Americans to clean air. We have a right to not breathe in leaded gasoline. We have a right to not have our kids get sick by swimming or eating fish with mercury in it. That it should be a constitutional right that we're guaranteed. We came up short on that. With all of the great legislation that came through there, one of the ones most controversial, the most popular, the Endangered Species Act, from first Johnson did one in 66 and then Nixon in 73. And by then it lost its wave. So there were three great moments in American history where we had environmental movements or conservation movements. Theodore Roosevelt is the first wave in the early 20th century, 1901 to 1909. Second wave, FDR, 1933 to 1945. I don't know if you know, but Roosevelt, whenever he'd fill out an application where occupation was, he would say tree farmer. He ran all of the Churchill's Christmas trees came from the farm in Hyde Park by FDR. He went all over the country promoting national parks and wildlife. And the third is what we would call the John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Frank Church, Rachel Carson environmental movement of the 60s and early 1970s. And since then, the environment's been a rearguard action. What happened is, guys, it becomes global, and global issues are tough. It was one thing to say, right here in Idaho, let's leave this part of the sawtooths untrampled and keep it as a wilderness. That's one thing. It's another thing now to be trying to not only get Republicans and Democrats together, but then have to go global and tell India and China to stop their emissions or to meet these new progressive standards. So I think we're at an age now where the environmental issues always are taking a back seat. You'll see that, whenever we're in trouble, right now gasoline prices are high, then let's green light the pipelines and undo environmental legislation. It's always set up to be the boogeyman in economic hard times and inflationary times. And yet what we need to do, and I'm so glad some of you high school students are here. How neat. Thank you for coming and caring, and having Monica for having kids come to an event like this and care about just listening to somebody like me. I deeply appreciate it. But they're understandably wondering, how do we make, you can save a wilderness, but how do you save the planet from this existential crisis where everything's burning, the Amazon's disappearing, wildfires might be here this summer, what? It's enough to make you ill. And my advice about it, for what it's worth of studying all this, is the media is part of the blame today. They're not covering issues of the environment as front page news. Second, this divide between right and left is heinous. That we're not looking at how can we keep our rivers and lakes clean. We're scoring political points against each other. I will tell you, in the 60s, and Peter and others here will know, there used to be an ability to get stuff done in Washington. And alas, that's not there. We're trying to deal with something like global environmental issues. On a good, right now, Biden has a 38% approval rating. Trump had about a 40% approval rating. Congress has like a 15% approval rating. The media, when I wrote my book on Walter Cronkite, the media, when he left in 1981, journalism had like a 75% approval rating. It's down to like 12%. Our democratic institutions aren't holding up. We're not able to work together. Social media is a factor of it. And and a lot of it is the way issues are being framed. As I said when I started, if you talk about who in this room wants a particular lake clean so our kids could swim and fish, everybody will say yes. And then the politics kick in. And I see no end in sight to it. So I tell young people, become a friends of a national park, monument, wilderness, state park, species in peril. The bald eagle was almost wiped out from DDT, and it came back with the Endangered Species Act. The California condor was almost dead. It came back. But don't get so overwhelmed by climate change that we're not doing local things to make the Boise River clean and be a healthy ecosystem. So if you can locally adopt and get involved with the local conservation corps, and every community in America amps that up, you'll get this public constituency. And then we just have to hope we have leaders to capitalize on it. Leaders like Theodore Roosevelt, leaders like FDR, and leaders like Senator Frank Church, one of my true heroes. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dr. Brinkley. That was an important speech. And to my students in the back, many of you who work at ICL and part of the Youth Salmon Protectors, I know you heard that. My name is Monica Church, and tonight I have the honor of presenting the Frank and Bethine Church Award for Public Service. Frank and Bethine were two of Idaho's stellar leaders. Both happen to be my grandparents. Born into pioneer families, Frank Church and Bethine Clark Church represent America's greatest generation, a generation that devoted their lives to public service. This award represents a continuation of their life's work and was presented for the first time in 2012 to former Boise State President Bob Custra and wife Kathy Custra, both of whom enjoyed long and distinguished careers in government and academia. In his remarks, Dr. Custra said Frank Church was one of the political icons who inspired me to pursue public service. In 2013, the Frank and Bethine Church Award for Public Service was given to then Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr. and to then Mayor of the City of Boise, David Beater. In his acceptance, Vice President Biden said, Frank Church wasn't just one of the giants of American foreign policy. He wasn't just a senator with unparalleled principles and political courage, which we heard a little bit about tonight. He was my mentor and he was my friend. He said of Bethany Church that without her support and encouragement after the tragic death of his wife and his daughter, he may never have continued a life in public service. Mayor Beater said of the churches, they brought Idaho together and introduced her to the world. In 2014, the Frank and Bethine Church Award for Public Service was presented to four-term Idaho Governor and U.S. Secretary of the Interior Cecil Andrus. Governor Andrus, who also happens to be my grandfather on my mother's side, said of his legacy of public service, it is the greatest gift I can leave my grandchildren. Among the tributes to his career were videos from President Jimmy Carter and then Secretary of the Interior Sally Jewell. In 2016, this award was given to former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, who with his wife Sylvia established a Panetta Institute for Public Policy in Monterey, California, as an organization to teach young people about the value of civil society. 2 years ago this month, tonight's recipient of the Frank and Bethine Church Award for Public Service was scheduled to receive it at a dinner just like this. But because of the pandemic, that event was canceled. So it is with great pleasure that I'm glad that he agreed to reschedule. Before I present this award, I wanted to tell a short story. As you heard, I am a teacher. I currently teach at Boise High School. And when Professor Brinkley agreed to come to Boise, I knew a great number of fellow educators who would love to hear from him. Teachers who proudly display his books and use his knowledge, the knowledge they gleaned from his work in their lectures. But I knew one teacher in particular who would be very honored to be here tonight, Doug Stan. Doug told me once of this book his mother had bought him during his first career in the private sector as a stock analyst. The Magic Bus, an American Odyssey, one of Professor Brinkley's early pieces, whereby he documented the experiences of an experiential American history course that traveled across the country in a sleeper bus. This book changed Doug's life. It led him to perhaps one of the greatest acts of public service, teaching high school. Public servants come in all shapes, but perhaps none so important as those that engage others to join with them in service to their community and to our country. And with that, on behalf of the Frank Church Institute, it is my honor to present the Frank and Bethine Church Award for Public Service to Dr. Douglas Brinkley, inscribed in grateful recognition to his distinguished career as presidential historian and conservation chronicler. Thank you.
I'm not supposed to talk, but I want to say one thing. Gary, you're the greatest. You've done such a great job with everything. And Boise State has the most dynamic, interesting president that I've ever encountered. And just to get to be with her tonight's been worth everything. Thank you, guys.
So thank you, Doug, for your generous remarks, for your devotion to the environment, for your admiration of Frank Church, and for your loving Idaho as much as we all do. We look forward to reading The Silent Spring, and please give our regards to Anne and your family and return to Idaho soon. Thank you also to Dr. Trump, to Skip Oppenheimer, and Monica Church. As Skip mentioned, I'm retiring as executive director this summer. I could not have done it for nearly 20 years without the support of my wife, Yvonne. Thank you. And we have the good fortune of having Monica Church succeed me. So I look forward to working with her in the Frank Church Institute in the months and years ahead. Thank you very much.